Reluctantly.
When I prepare for conversations like these, and in this particular instance, I say to myself, holy shit, Blue Rodeo has been around for 40 years. And then I think to myself, wow, I've been playing Blue Rodeo music on the radio since it was brand new. And it always knocks my socks off. Greg
It's
Keelor has agreed to be my guest today.
Reluctantly.
This podcast, reluctantly sponsored by homegirls.ca, a top producing team at Remax Professionals. Also, by Northern Alberta Heating, with work in and out of Edmonton and hiring bonuses for experienced candidates. Email your resume to tim@northernheating.ca.
Reluctantly.
Yeah, we've been around for a lifetime.
It certainly is a lifetime. It's more than a generation, and the contributions are, well, they're phenomenal. Greg, I found myself going back and listening because being in radio, a lot of times we get a radio edit, but I went back and heard some of the album versions of some of the songs that Blue Rodeo has put on. I've been in your website and listening to some of your solo stuff and just knocked out by some of the 8 and 9 and 7 minute versions of songs that were just so terrific back then. And I always thought, man, I wish we could have played those on the radio, but people just don't have
Right.
the attention span for them, I guess. When we talk about 40 years of Blue Rodeo and it being a lifetime, it makes me think of something that Joe Walsh said. It's more fun to be 20 in the 70s than it is 70 in the 20s.
It's a good one.
How are you adjusting to things now that I guess you're going to be 71 this year, but has it snuck up on you? Has it been a long time coming, or was it just, gone like a flash?
Well, not really. No, I haven't reflected on it quite like that. I don't really know or remember myself well as a younger man. That headspace, I don't know where I lived in those days. Just being 70, dealing with, like, I'm going through a lot of diabetic, I have, health issues. So I have to deal with a lot of letting go of stuff. Like, my left eye is bad, my ears are bad, my feet are numb. I have a long list of diabetic complications. I've lost a toe. That's all in like the last 5 years. So the last 5 years have been sort of a re-education and a retuning of my mind and what I'm, sort of looking for in life. Like, when I was younger, I was indestructible. I was ambitious. I had a lot of momentum, and the circle of life is a very interesting thing, and everyone, I'm sure, looks at it in their own perspective, their own way. All that sounds sort of a bit of a bummer, but besides, sometimes the physical pain, I couldn't be happier.
The last 5 years, you're talking about the challenges that you've had. The last 5 years has also been a pretty remarkable 5 years. The documentary, the Order of Canada, the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame. You just recently celebrated your second wedding anniversary with Kaylee. There's been a lot to smile about and a lot to dance for, hasn't there?
Well, yeah, there's sort of an essence of being I'm in the victory lap of my career, in a way, as far as, Blue Rodeo and being a Canadian act. But, it's sort of funny, and it sounds so corny, but it's always been about the music. I still, I love playing a lot every day, writing and practicing, at least 3 or 4 hours a day. I spend doing that. And that's where a lot of my joy comes from in life. It's where there's something about just the practice of singing every day is just good for my head, heart, and soul. It's a very good thing. for me. And, just trying to stay healthy to be able to still get up on stage and play.
Are you still actively involved? I know that there's so many things, and I don't know how much people really believe Wikipedia and all of this stuff. And then, of course, it was documented in the special, in the documentary, that
What's a
you had left the
PDA?
band.
Oh, Wikipedia.
Yeah,
That's a funny
yeah,
miss here.
yeah. Wikipedia. I don't know how much on Wikipedia is believable or factual or whatever, but I have been curious as to just exactly how much you've been involved with the band, with performing, if there's still the collaboration going on with Jim, or if you're still moving forward with everything like that.
Um, Jim and I haven't sat down and collaborated as songwriters per se for a long time, but we did an extensive tour a year ago, like a lot of touring, and that was very enjoyable. Band has never been better. So yeah, we're still playing. Jim put out a solo record in the early fall, and so he's been touring at that this year, and so he's been touring that, and we still play shows a lot in there. But I think we'll start talking about making a new record even now, and then we'll start talking about doing another tour.
Is it going to be a similar situation where in the documentary you guys said that you were going to take a break, and then all of a sudden it was the farmhouse recordings, and all the families were there? It was almost like a commune of everybody all together, and then all of a sudden there was new music again.
Oh, taking the break back in 5 days era.
Yeah.
No, it won't be like that. There won't be a, uh, that's sort of the age, and things like that just sort of happen. It wasn't like we had a big plan for that. We had done a tour of Australia. We got back, and the band just felt great, and I thought it'd be a great idea to record. It wasn't even something that we had thought or talked about, and it just turned into a much bigger thing than what we would imagine. We made 5 days. We also demoed about 30 songs at that time, so it was a pretty inspired time for the band.
What do you think when the collaboration is happening, and if it does happen again, what do you think the fundamental differences between you and Jim are as far as your songwriting styles? The reason I ask is I went back and listened to Diamond Mine, and the full length version just put me in the mind of something that would have been maybe a Doors song, or at least that kind of a sound. But then listening to Try, and then other songs where Jim was singing it, what do you think? Was there more of an experimental sort of side to you that was trying to get out, or got out completely, compared to what Jim was doing with the heartbreak and the love songs and that sort of thing?
Well, I like heartbreak and a sad song too. I didn't start playing guitar till I was 21, and in my teen years, I listened to stuff like the Doors, but there was also the San Franciscan scene was one that I really liked, with Quicksilver, Country Joe, and the Dead. And there's a certain guitar style in those bands. It's sort of an SG with a lot of reverb, and Hendrix, like that. All those great songs. That one song on Electric Ladyland. Maybe it's called Electric Ladyland. I always enjoyed being in those long landscapes, and so I always, I've tried to emulate those, and I enjoyed being in a sort of a jam band. It's always sort of been part of the band. It doesn't always make it to record, but it's always part of the shows. Playing with Bobby Wiseman in the original lineup was one of the best musical experiences I've had in my life. He was a great educator, and he just had the ability to take songs to places that most musicians don't go to. So,
It's funny that people who are artists and make the music have the patience for the people like Bobby, but the people who are the money or the business acumen or the corporate stuff have less patience for it. It's super unfortunate, isn't it?
yeah, it's a weird thing, but it's everything in life. If you have a different perspective, and to use a quirky, like a quotation word, quirky, it just means that he has a different perspective on life, and he's absorbed and assimilated this culture in a different way than what is accepted as the prescribed common way. And so he took different roads and made different choices because he was inspired to do that. And it was sort of a strange thing that Bobby came into Blue Rodeo because he was an avant-garde musician, and he played avant-garde music around Toronto in all the places that facilitated that music. And so it was a little bizarre for him to come to Blue Rodeo. And the world is always a bit more of a struggle for people who have such a strong and independent inspiration within them.
There was a bunch of different styles that of music before everything was kind of settled on with Blue Rodeo, with I don't know to label it rockified country or countrified rock or something like that. And you talked about the influences, the San Francisco kind of scene and that sort of thing. And you specifically mentioned the SG. Was there ever a love for the sound of the Rickenbacker, like the Birds and one
Well, Bird's a huge influence for me, songwriting and guitar and aesthetic, fashion, and all the sort of lives of the Birds. There's the original lineup, which I love, but then I love the lineup with Clarence Thomas as well. So the Birds are a huge inspiration. What was the question, though?
I would
I was just getting tripped out on Birds music in my head.
you tripped out on the Birds.
Reluctantly.
This podcast is reluctantly sponsored by Northern Alberta Heating Limited, specializing in commercial HVAC all over the province of Alberta. Right now, they are urgently seeking motivated long-term employees that want to work for a great company. Are you an experienced sheet metal worker? Are you looking for a new outfit? A change for the better? Maybe the place you're at isn't the right fit for you. Well, send your resume to tim@northernheating.ca. They're looking for new people, first through fifth-year apprentices and younger journeymen. They have work both in and out of Edmonton, and they're offering hiring bonuses for experienced candidates. Get your resume together and send it off today. Email tim@northernheating.ca to kickstart something new or a change for the better.
Reluctantly.
And just random thoughts and stuff that I guess come into the head. You see other documentaries where the Birds were involved, and then David Crosby, Stills, Nash, Joni Mitchell, all of that scene that was down there. That would even be Alice Cooper was a part of it, and how influential it became on so many different artists and so many different genres, and the way that Blue Rodeo ended up with the countrified rock or rockified country, however you want to label it. It was really one of a kind at the time, wasn't it?
Well, Jim and I had been living in New York for 3 years, and there were a few great country bars that I love going to, and just started listening to more country. Jim and I's first band, the Hi-Fi's, was sort of a punky amphetamine pop band, and hugely influenced by British Invasion and garage and all that. And with Blue Rodeo, we've never really felt that we had to stay the course on any particular sound. We just sort of, however the songs come, we just sort of record them, whatever it might be, like, so I think it was good not to try to pigeonhole ourselves, just to whatever the song was. And so we had two songwriters who seem like they're coming from different places. The nice thing about the collaboration is that we love singing together. We've always uh, enjoyed the sound of our voices, the vibration of our voices is from early on. It was just something that was very pleasing for us. And I remember when we learned the parts for the Beatles song "There's a Place." We were Beatle freaks too.
Mm-hmm.
You know that song? There is a place. And so at one point in the harmony or vocal, the melody and the harmony switch. And we hadn't done that much harmony. We were singing harmony, but we hadn't, it was more instinctual rather than actually working things out. And there we started to work things out, and that was a really exciting thing for us. We just thought, what? This is amazing.
Was there ever a time where you consciously said to each other or looked at each other or recognized from each other that, we don't have to conform to a pop, we don't have to conform to a punk or a rock because we are doing something that is fresh and new, nobody else is doing it, we're blazing a trail? Did you recognize that at the time?
I think in a way we realized that we just wanted to do what we wanted to do. And we're very lucky, a little arrogant, but we just thought we'll just, if we like it, hopefully our audience will like it, and that sort of stayed true for our career. There's never been, any great controversies about Blue Rodeo, or, no one's ever burned our records because of anything we said about Jesus or political or satanic, or like our audience has been very loyal to us, and we end up having like families, multi-generational, grandmother, mother, and child, and they're all at a Blue Rodeo show singing along. So we definitely appreciate all of that, but it was never by design.
Was there ever any thought put toward the appearance of the band? I know Jim has had a pretty consistent look over the years, but you have gone, little here, little there, little that way, a little bit with hairstyles and a little bit
I've
of
had some
fashion.
wacky hair.
Yeah,
And
looking.
Jim has had some. He's been a little more consistent. Jim has just sort of been Jim since I met him. He's had the same voice his whole life, and that's a bit of a gift. And I guess I've had the same voice, but I've sort of adapted different sort of vocal affectations along the way. I sing in certain styles from time to time, where Jim is a little more just sings Jim.
Much Music was such a huge part of the initial launch of the band after some, I guess, some tepid response with just radio. But when Much Music came in, was there ever any corporate sort of demands on appearance from the band, or were you guys left to your
We
own
were
sort of
always pretty independent, all of that. We were really lucky in that after a period of time, Try became a hit single. At first, yeah, we thought that the record label was going to drop us. But eventually, Try became a hit, and then we had a few more hits, and those successes led to more touring and bigger audiences, and everything just sort of grew on its own. Then, we did Diamond Mine in a very unorthodox way. We did it with Doug McClement's truck at an old theater, and even though it's a bit of a weird record, it did really well too. Casino, the singles were really big for us, and with each record, our audience expanded, our radio play expanded, and so it was just going along. So the record company let us sort of do our own thing. And we never had, you've mentioned a few times the pressure of corporations on music and all of that. But we never experienced that. If anything, weirdly, I'd say we've had a good partnership with Warner Brothers through all this. They've always sort of let us do our own thing, give them enough rope, and we've always got along with the people we worked with. I think that, when I first was involved in it, I was a bit of a snotty ass individual, and I was sort of against it if it was corporate. I was like, and I had a great mistrust for the label and all and that, but I was sort of fighting with myself more than them because they were actually being really great to us, and they always have been.
That was actually something I was going to ask you about. A lot of times a band gets their first record deal and it ends up being heavily weighted toward the record company, and they get a hell of a lot more than the band gets, and the band has to take quite a long time to pay back in advance, and then all the money comes out of the record sales, and then by the time the band sees any of the money, it's like pennies on the dollar. But you saying that you had a good relationship with the record company, that that's actually, that actually makes me feel really good, believe it or not.
Well, that is 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I have no idea what the music industry is now. I don't really understand it. And I'm glad that I don't have to do and be all the things that a young artist has to be today. You have to make music, and then you have to do your own publicity, and you have to do your own videos. We were around just at the beginning of videos, and I resented videos. Like, I thought, well, why do we have to do these things? Like, I just want to make music. I just want to play. And so the idea of doing videos at first just seemed ridiculous to me. I resented it, and I didn't like that it took the focus off the music. I have no idea how to do it today. I have great sympathy for young artists who are trying to get their act out there.
You're right. The way you outlined it, there's a lot of the stuff that the artist has to do that a record company or the promoter or whatever would have done in the past, and it would have been part of a big machine instead of a single cog trying to catch something.
Yeah, it sure is. It's always an amazing thing. Like I'm to think of the success that Blue Rodeo has had. It still sort of blows my mind. And when we were younger, we just wanted to make it so bad. And back in those days, you got on radio and then you just played and played and played and played and played. And we toured and toured and toured. We got to the point where we were playing like 250 nights a year. And, after that, that period, we sort of had a collective nervous breakdown. And I guess that might have been around the time of 5 days. And you were alluding to that earlier, that we were going to take a break then for like a year. And we ended up making a record that put us back on the road, playing as, we weren't going to pay 250 nights a year, but we were still playing a lot of nights a year.
Back in those times when you're playing 250 nights a year, you're on Much Music. Who were some of the fellow bands that you would run into, that you would open for, or they would open for you, or other people that you would meet at things like? I'm guessing Blue Rodeo didn't have a lot of ice mist for your hair in the rider compared to some of the others back in the day.
Well, yeah, the Canadian bands, it was a really pretty tight community, even though it was scattered and different. But we did crisscross a lot and ended up on the same stages a lot. So I think of 5440, The Hip, and the Cowboy Junkies, and Jane Sibrey, Sarah McLachlan. There's some, that's a pretty good list. Sloan.
So there was there was definitely that strain of bands, and I guess prior to that would have been the the April Wines, the BTOs, and
That was sort of the wave before us. Our first, we sent a demo to Warner Brothers, and it had Try, Rose-Colored Glasses, and something else on it. I can't remember. And they sent us a letter saying they're not signing bands like us. They're into a heavier pop bands like Harlequin Suite. They use them as their example. And so that's what was around when we started to, oh, Katie Lang, we did our first tour with Katie Lang. So that was sort of the musical scene at the time. And in the mid 80s and later 80s, there was this Canadian thing that happened. And it was really a great scene, and it was just sort of like opening up new venues and people starting to identify with Canadian music. And as you were saying, much music helped a lot in that as well.
Reluctantly.
this podcast is reluctantly sponsored by the real estate team of homegirls.ca, a top producing team at Remax Professionals. If you are buying or selling in the Edmonton region, Shauna and Bonnie can handle everything with strong industry connections to mortgage brokers, home inspectors, lawyers, and contractors to support every step of the process. The market is very active right now. We recently listed our home again, and it went from MLS to closing conditions in 8 days. Now, of course, results may vary from property to property, but Shauna and Bonnie have been our trusted real estate advisors through buying and selling no less than 7 properties. I've recommended them to many friends who want real, relatable people with a personalized, hands-on approach. New home, investment, recreational, even commercial properties. Homegirls.ca is the website. Email info is right there. And the phone number is 780-517-HOME.
Reluctantly.
One of my first musical memories is Simon and Garfunkel. Bridge Over Troubled Water, El Condor Pasa, The Boxer. I remember my dad had a record player where the table would fold up into like a suitcase sort of a thing and then fold out, and that would be the where you'd put the record and put the needle on there, and I was allowed to put on my Simon and Garfunkel records, and I always was really super fascinated and intrigued by the fact that Simon and Garfunkel both sang lead, and then there was the Beatles, John Lennon and Paul McCartney both sang lead, and then the Eagles with Don Henley and Glenn Frey both singing lead. And for some reason, there's something inside me that always attracts me to that dynamic in a group, a band, a duo, whatever the case may be. And you know what? You touched on it before. Maybe it is the harmonies. Maybe that's what it is that just draws people in. And you talk about how it became for you and Jim a thing, and it's like, oh, wow, we have this harmony thing, and how people appreciate it at the same way. Do you ever feel like you are the Lennon to Jim's McCartney, or the Jagger to Richards, or the Simon to Garfunkel, or anything? I mean, you mentioned the hair. Maybe you are the Garfunkel, considering the hair thing.
Well, you mentioned the hair, and I just agreed with you. The Lennon McCartney thing was big in our musical education. Like we were Beatle freaks, and chord structures, harmony structures, the presentation of the band, the sort of cheekiness of the band. We liked everything about that. And going deep into the Beatles is a very rewarding musical education. Not only were we freaked out and inspired by them as musicians, but then the innovation and the how intense their records were, like the engineering of the records and everything that they brought to the studio. and eventually using the studio as an instrument. They're a beautiful evolution of music, like to go from the four kids in high school uh, doing what the teacher told them and following the notes on the board to tearing down the school and rebuilding it in a way that had never been imagined. And so that they changed the whole thing. And there's a few of those moments in popular culture, since the Second World War, I guess, because that's when we started recording over here in North America, and just all the technological things that have happened along the way, and often at the demand of the artist, starting with Bing Crosby when he started Amtech recording and introducing multi-track and all these crazy things that are taken for granted now. But the Beatles just made all of that go into hyper warp speed.
When you are producing, do you ever think to yourself, or do you have something in the back of your head, what would George Martin do in this situation?
Yeah, well, I think, I definitely think along those terms, Beatle. There's a few producers that are huge in my head, and so yeah, you're often asking, like, like Joe Boyd, one of my favorite producers. What would Joe Boyd do? And or Jimmy Miller, or the list just goes on and on and on. And it's almost you can sort of direct the arrangement of the song just thinking about what someone else might do with it, and that's sort of inspiring, because sometimes you get to a place when you're recording a song and it just gets, you sort of run into a roadblock somehow, and you think, what am I going to do here? Oh yeah, let's try that worked for that. Often it does.
When you guys were starting out and putting things together back in the early days with Cleve and Baz and Bobby and so on, was it more you and Jim handling all of the production aspects of it? Was there a lot of contributions from their point of view? I guess I kind of wonder, with the Beatles, it was John and Paul, but George was there, and even Ringo chimed in with Octopus's Garden, and so were Cleve and Baz and Bobby also having a hand in it?
Yeah, everybody has a hand. Jim and I had the biggest hands in it, but when you're first rehearsing and arranging the song in the Blue Rodeo world, everybody had a say, and we tried, to, if someone said, well, let's try this, we're okay, well, let's try this. And that can go on for a long time, and it can actually get quite frustrating. And sometimes you're only talking about 8 bars of something, and you've spent 2 hours on trying to get something in there, and everyone's got an idea, so it can get a little confusing at times. And there's sometimes when I'll come in with a song and I'll have a pretty good idea of how I want it to go, and there's other times where I just sort of throw it up and see how it ends up.
I suppose there's a certain amount of economy that has to happen when recording or songwriting or putting everything together. Is that fair to say, what you were kind of describing there?
Economy how?
Economy in time management, and you're talking about the 8 bars. You could go for 2 hours. At some point you have to say, okay, here's how it's going to be, no matter who that might be, I suppose.
Yeah, sometimes you get all these ideas, and it usually ends up it's not even, no, it's the songwriter, so it's Jim on his songs and me on my songs. We sort of have the veto on those, so it's not like there is just one, or Jim and I calling the shots. When Jim's tune, my suggestions just come in the same way that Basil's would, and he sort of evaluates it from there.
Do you ever get into a situation where you write a song and say, this is for Jim to sing, or vice versa? Or is it always your voice when you're writing?
At the beginning, Jim sang a few of my songs, but, you know, basically we've just sort of written songs for our own voices, and then when we get together and working on harmonies, you know, we often will, make arrangement or melody suggestions, and sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Something just popped into my head before we came on and started chatting. I was listening to City is a Symphony, 9-minute masterpiece from your solo album. And I found myself just mesmerized that there were very Beatles-esque parts in there from the production point of view with the strings and the little subtle changes and the story and the video was brilliantly directed, and I think that's something that more people should know about. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. City is a Symphony from what is it, 2018, somewhere in there.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, that you came out, but your solo efforts are equally worthy of a listen to just as much as any Blue Rodeo song. When you're at home, how are you set up? Like you said, you play 3 or 4 hours a day. Do you just hit record and start noodling, or do you never
I don't
record?
record. I don't record. No, I just uh, I'll keep a. I have a blaster that I've had for 40 years as well, and it's a beautiful JVC. It just sounds fantastic. I'll have that. That's on the table beside me. But when I first had a studio at home, I'd be in the studio every day, 10 hours a day, if I wasn't on the road or, had shit to do. And I just dinker and around and listen to microphone and amp combinations and vocal and microphone combinations and acoustic and all of it, just endlessly listening to everything. And it's funny though, when I was in that mode, I'd start recording a song that I hadn't fully written yet. And again, it would just keep on falling apart. And I realized that I had to finish the song before I recorded it, just to have the tracks laid down a bit more. And so I'm not really in the studio recording. I'm mostly just writing these days.
Were you, when you had the studio, was it before Pro Tools, all the digital stuff? Did you like have Studer 8 or 16 tracks or something like that?
I
Is that what
started
it
out
was?
with tape machines. MCI was my first tape machine, inch 8-track. And then Doug McClement, a great Canadian engineer, he had this mobile truck called Comfort Sound that recorded so many people over the years. Anyways, he had an Ampex 2-inch tape, and then he had a head with 16 2-inch, and then he had a head with inch 8-track. And so that was my favorite machine of all time. And inch 8-track was my favorite way to record. I found that the limitations presented a creativity. The way that you had to record on inch 8, it was all sort of EQ'd, and you had to be a little more meticulous with your recording. For me, at least I felt you did. Because you had to know where you were going. You had to do, like you would put piano and, let's say, bass guitar on the same track because they weren't going to interfere too much when you EQ'd them. You weren't going to be affecting either instrument in a deteriorous way, And so all these little things that you just sort of you had to be aware of. And so I found that to be a very creative and a great sounding medium to work with. And if you look through history, that'd be an interesting little thing for somebody to do. To see how many great songs were done on the least amount of tracks? Because you're thinking like it started with a one, and then, but you think of all the great tracks that were done on 4 tracks, and then such a great glut of great pop music was done on inch 8 track in the late 60s and the beginning of the 70s.
How often do you see the guys? I know there are some Blue Rodeo dates coming up. How often do you all gather, if at all?
We don't really rehearse anymore. We'll rehearse for a new record, but even last record was a COVID record, so there wasn't even that. We meet up for gigs, but we don't rehearse, and we won't be recording for a while. So we get together more now these days for like we had a stamp the other day,
Yeah, I saw. That's what I was going to ask about.
and so we all got together for that. And then there's been the documentary and its screening, so we get all together. We get together for that. But no, just mostly just gigs.
Well, you and Jim have been friends for, like, I think you mentioned in the documentary, for a lifetime, and from high school on. And is there a part of you that is at peace with the limited amount of time that you see each other? Do you wish there was more time where you could hang out? Do you want to sit on the porch and look over the valley in your backyard, sort of thing, or watch the birds, or I sense that you're the kind of guy that can sit with a friend and there doesn't have to be a whole lot of conversation. Every once in a while there will be an acknowledgement or a noticing of something off in the distance, but that seems like it would be great for you.
Well, that's funny. No, I'm not a. I enjoy conversation, and you know, it's sort of funny to try to explain my social life to you, but I've got lots of friends, and we hang out, and you know, Jim and I, you know, we sort of lived together for 10 years. Same house or apartment building, or we were pretty much inseparable for a long time. And I guess the strange thing is that we still enjoy each other's company. We still enjoy each other's sense of humor. And that's a big thing for me. I think there's a certain sense of humor, and I don't know how to describe it. Maybe dark is a superficial way, but dark and cutting. And so that's sort of where I grew up as a kid in Montreal. This very sarcastic group of people that I was as a kid and with all my friends, and we were mean to each other. We were jocks, and we had all of that sort of nonsense about us. And Jim and I have that adolescent connection. We met when we were adolescents. We had sort of the same sense of humor. It's sort of mean and dark, and um, that's still a part of us. Like I enjoy whenever we're somewhere. We're the guys that make the little asides to each other while the presentation is going on. We're in school I was always getting thrown out of class for speaking out or trying to be the funny guy, and so that's a big part of our friendship, and it makes a lot of situations easier to digest.
Talking about the fact that the two of you were jocks playing football, and back in the day, would either one of you back then would have had a sniff at professional football, or was it more of a high school thing?
High school thing. I had a sniff of professional hockey.
Is that right?
I was a goaltender playing in Montreal with Town of Mount Royal, and it was the municipal teams that represented different parts of Montreal. There was a Verdun team, a LaSalle team, a Lachine team, all that sort of stuff. and you played Pee Wee all the way to junior. And so I got drafted by Rosemount, and I got drafted by the Toronto Marlboros, or asked out. It wasn't a draft in those days. I just got the letter asked out for the tryouts, and the Hamilton Red Wings, which were both in the Ontario Junior A League at the time. And so I was out with the Marlies in '72, and this is a good hockey story. I was out with the Marlies in '72, and so I was doing boards at the end of the practice, which is just going back and forth: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, for cardiovascular reasons. And we were in the Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens under the old Dominion clock, '72. And so practice was over, and everybody had gone off the ice, and I was just skating around waiting for the Zamboni to come on. And out on the ice steps Bobby Orr. And I go, what? And so I get in the net, and so he starts skating around, taking shots on me. And then Frank Mahovlich. And I couldn't figure it out. It was like a surreal dream, a manifestation of Shoeless Joe sort of manifestation. And so for about 10, 15 minutes, they sort of played one-on-one and took shots on me until the Zamboni came on. And I couldn't really figure it out. And then I realized that Team Canada was practicing after us. And Orr couldn't play because his knees were so bad, but he enjoyed the camaraderie so much and just hanging out that he went to the practices and skated with the team. And I didn't make the Marlies that year, and that was the end of my hockey career. And I was like, 17, 18. And I was still 3 years away from playing guitar. And I had no idea I was going to be a musician. And I was, it was a strange turn of events to become a musician. And Jim was one of the great inspirations for me to be a musician. He and his friends would sit around and play acoustic guitars, and they would sing all those songs, the bands that you were talking about earlier. And I was so self-conscious. I was so crippled by self-consciousness. I couldn't even sing on the choruses. I would just, and I just go, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could sing. I wish I could play guitar. It just seemed like the most fun and the thing that got you the highest, so.
When's the last time you told that hockey story about being in net for Mahovlich and Orr? When?
It's come up a couple of times over the last few years with this year with the documentary and all.
Being a jock and being a musician, two diametrically opposed things, usually in high school, and I think we've all experienced it to a certain degree. There's the jocks and there's the music dweebs, or
right.
And never the two shall meet sort of thing. And quite often it's the jocks picking on the music class things. And I just think back to my high school. I wish I was in band, but there was always that sort of I don't know if I want to go in band. I don't want to get made fun of or anything like that. But
right.
I find it interesting that you had the two come together there with the help of Jim.
Well, yeah, I think I'd already spent, at 17, I'd already spent a year away from home playing hockey, and the shine had come off. I remember thinking, if I don't make the Marlies, I don't really want to play anymore. I didn't have the same drive and ambition that I had once had. I think that I was just sort of getting off that train. I had to slow down for a while, and then figure, I didn't even know about being a musician. It was, I loved what Jim and all his friends did. But again, when I look at life and how it sort of plays out, so many things have just sort of happened. It's not like I made a decision and decided this is what I'm going to do. I don't think I've ever done that. I don't know if I'm very good at doing that. Like the guitar, I was working at the Shadow Lake Louise the winter of '75, and my roommate had an acoustic guitar, and he had a Gordon Lightfoot book, and he had an Everly Brothers book. And I sat down with those books, and I taught myself the fingering of the chords from the little diagrams above, like all songbooks. And that's how I learned how to play guitar. And I went from Lake Louise to work on the Great Lakes Freighter, a boat called the Arbrus Angus. And we were going through, we had stopped in Trois Rivières. I can't remember what for. Oh, probably to unload wheat. And I went into the music store in Trois Rivières, and there was a blonde Ibanez on the wall, and Jim had a black one. So I thought, well, that must be a good guitar. I knew nothing about guitars. I didn't know Gibsons. I didn't know Fenders. I didn't know Gretsch. I knew nothing. Just went into a music store, and this blonde maple Ibanez was on there, and I picked it. I went back to the boat, and I wrote a song that night, and I couldn't believe it. I had never written a song before. I'd only poorly tried to sing the songs that I was learning from those two books. But, I guess that was the big shift in my life. That was when everything sort of changed a bit. That change, it started in the mountains in Lake Louise. But that's when it sort of galvanized. And after that song came out of me, I sat down at my table in my cabin, and I wrote myself a little manifesto just talking about how whatever just happened, this is what I have to dedicate my life to. And I have to be around people that do this. I have to be around creative people. And that's at an age when you're deciding, what you're going to do. Up until then, I was brought up in very middle class. Town of Mount Royal was sort of upper middle class, professional suburban life. And that is what I was sort of trained and conditioned to be some sort of professional dude. That was the milieu that I grew up in, and that's what everyone I knew did. Jim had applied to law school. He was set to go to law school. So when that part of my life, when you're making those decisions, which is an absurd thing, because you're just sort of being channeled into these societal normal things to do, it just all changed for me. I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do. I already was leaning towards the life of big adventure, whether that be Kerouac, Ginsberg, Kipling, or Fitzgerald. Those lives seemed more attuned to what I was going to do in my life rather than a suburban professional sort of job. And once I wrote that song, I was already on a Great Laker, and I thought I was just going to see the world with my guitar. I didn't really have, a career or anything planned, but I knew I just wanted to be creative.
Did you ever record that song? Do you still remember it? Do you
I
still?
don't remember that song, no. I remember maybe one line. I think that's something about stuff swirling around in the neon light, but I don't remember the song at all.
Did you ever have a chance to talk to Gordon Lightfoot and tell him about his influence on you in 1975 or whatever it was at
I did.
Chateau Lake Louise?
Yeah, which was, that's
Because
sort of like, I like all those full circle things too in life.
I would imagine if it was 1975 when you were learning the guitar to Gordon Lightfoot songbooks and then you made your way to work on the Great Lakes on the boat, and you weren't that far removed from your own wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, perhaps.
It wasn't that long before, and and I can attest to the storms of Lake Superior. They are harrowing experiences. And it's funny, a Great Lakes freighter, when it's going through, ocean boats go like this, right? Against the waves. And Great Lakes freighter, they roll like this in the waves. And it's a spooky feeling. And your bunk goes, if the bow is north, your bunk goes east to west. So you go back and forth on the roll So going across Superior is it's a great experience. It's a great thing to be in a Lake Superior storm.
When you were at Lake Louise and in Banff and stuff, were you working at the ski hill? I mean, you kind of jobs along
I
the
was
way as
working at the
well.
chateau as a houseman when I first got hired, and that's just sort of like you just sort of clean, sweep, wash the floors, all that sort of stuff. And then over the years, I think I worked everything like a waiter, busboy, the bartender, garbage man. I worked there for a couple of years.
These are revelations for people who might be hearing this for the first time, knowing that you everything from railroad to garbage man to cleaning hotel rooms and boats on Lake Superior and that sort of thing. And then you got into the situation where you learned the guitar and then hooked up with Jim for Blue Rodeo. And what took you to what made you to go to New York? How was it easy to get to New York and just live there for the year or 3 or whatever it was that you were there?
Well, we had the hi-fis in Toronto, and we had signed to this company called Ready Records, and we were going to make an album. We did a independent single in the hi-fis. Look what you've done. Then we got signed by Ready, but then they went bankrupt, and all the clubs we played closed down. Like there were a whole pile of bars in Toronto that sort of played new wavy punky stuff like The Edge, The Horseshoe, The Turning Point, Hotel California. There were a few places, and they all closed down. And so Jim's girlfriend at the time, who was going to be his wife eventually, she was going down for some acting classes. So we just thought, well, let's go down. We got nothing to lose, and we were of that life was an adventure. So let's get down there and see what it's got for us.
At any point when you were standing on stage at CBGB, if somebody would have come up to you and said, "Hey, you're going to be on a Canadian stamp one day," what would you have said to them?
Yeah, no, not in the same universe at that time. Totally different dimension.
How much of a desire or a non thing? I don't know how you would categorize it. I mean, as immensely popular as you are in Canada, the U.S. thing wasn't really skyrockets or anything like that. It's the same with the Tragically Hip, where you are very much Canada's band, as other bands may also have that label, but Blue Rodeo is definitely Canada's band. Was there disappointment there?
We had worked so hard and played so many dates in America, and it just wasn't panning out for us. And everything had sort of worked out up until that point. And we almost took it for granted that America would work out for us. But when it didn't, after a couple of grueling years, it was easy to give up. We had a good thing going on in Canada, and traveling in America is daunting because there's just so many places to play. Every 50 miles, there's a community with a place where any band can play almost. It's just like we just got sick of it. We were just, it was too much on our nervous systems, the whole thing. And we thought we had all the earmarkings. We were on this label that was really into us, and Gold Mountain, which was the biggest management company at the time. It had everybody, and we just thought, oh, we got this made in the shade. We did Letterman 2 or 3 times. We did the Tonight Show. We were on the morning shows. We did all that stuff. Right? It just didn't click, and who's to know why? And I'm very grateful now that that I have the life that I have. Quite happy and contented with. I got a stamp, for God's sake.
Somebody's going to be licking your backside soon and sending a letter.
That's right. You can kiss my stamp.
People say, "Oh, but they never made it in the U.S." Well, at some point, you have to stop bashing your head against a rock because the rock's not going to give; it's going to be your head, and then you have to. It's one of those things where instead of always wanting more, you got to be happy with what you've got, and you've got a tremendous amount with the success and the popularity and the adulation and everything here in Canada. I mean, the induction into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame has to be a huge amount of pride for you and Jim both.
Yeah, it was great. And I was also with some friends, like Sarah McLachlan was getting inducted at the same time. And, Sarah was on a couple of our records. She was on 5 Days and Nowhere to Hear. And then she was a big part of my first solo record. So that felt great, to be getting a Songwriters Hall of Fame with our old buddy Sarah McLachlan. And she sang one of our songs, and I just love her voice so much. And so, yeah, that was a real treat.
Was it the same ceremony that Tom Cochran was there too? That was
That's
the
right.
same
Yeah,
time?
Tom Cochran.
Yeah.
And
Oh, that's right. The Order of Canada too. Am I supposed to be calling you governor?
no, I don't think we get any prefix with the Order of Canada. I
Right,
call it
there's
the
no
Odor of Canada. So, there you go.
the Order of Canada. Does it make you think to yourself, I'm a musician, I'm an artist? Was it kind of an oogie feeling to get that adulation like that
A what
presented to
feeling?
you? Was it like an oogie feeling, like I don't know why this is happening, sort of thing, or did you
Oogie?
feel just
What's the word?
oogie, oogie, just like
Oogie.
it was, yeah, like I don't know
That's
why
one of
this
your
is happening.
terms. Um, I've always, growing up in Montreal, we were really into the Marx Brothers. We were real sarcastic, kids. Everybody wanted to be Groucho. No one wanted to be Harpo. So, all of these events, I always feel like the kid at the back of the class, and I just want to be a smart aleck. I just want to get a laugh out of the whole thing. So, I've never really been able to take myself in those situations that seriously. I do appreciate it, and I love, I love being on a stamp. I love that I got the Order of Canada. I love that Walk of Fame and all that stuff. They're the laurels of our profession, and it's funny. It only happens for the night, and in interview, most of these things they're not part of your life in any way. The stamp is a funny one. The stamp is very happy about the stamp. And it's a strange thing because I didn't think I was going to be, you know, but the ceremony was beautiful. They really did a fantastic job. They decorated the place and they had flowers all over the place because there's flowers on the stamp. And so they did just such a great job and treated us so well. And I've got more response from people, fans, family, just saying, "Way to go! You're on a stamp." Like it just means a lot to people. So that's been sort of funny.
Earlier, right off the hop, you talked about some of the health challenges that you're dealing with the diabetes, and I know you're suffering from migraines and
I haven't had
tinnitus. And
migraines now for a while.
oh, is that right? Oh, that's
Yeah,
great to hear.
yeah.
Are you doing something specific to keep them at bay, or has it been
Well,
it
the
just
migraines
happened
came at
naturally?
again. I'd lost a toe to diabetes, and I had
Mhm.
ketone acetosis. I've had ketone acetosis a few times, and so I was in the hospital for a good chunk of time. And I got out of the hospital, and I just had migraines, and they just would not go away, and it was defeating and depressing, and I couldn't do what I do. I couldn't sing, couldn't play much guitar. And I've gone through, a few periods in my life where these moments, these periods come where I'm just sort of incapacitated by the physical limitations of whatever it is at the time. So the migraines at that point were crippling, and eventually it all, got sorted out. It's a funny thing, those times and the sort of obstacles that happen physically. It's also the only time they're great teachers of humility. And the only teacher that I ever really listened to is pain. The rest of the time, I just sort of say, "Oh, I can deal with that," or "That's no big deal," or "We'll get over this." It just, what is it? It just dominates your life in such a way. And it's just so humbling. And it's the only time I pray. No, that's not true. But I don't even know who I'm praying to. But I'm rambling.
No, that's fine. And well, who you're praying to? I mean, you did start out in a church choir after all, didn't you?
Oh, that was my first thing. Yep. Yeah. Sister Mary Paul and grade 5 in the boys' choir at St. Joseph's in town of Mount Royal.
With some of the health challenges that you're dealing, is it going to prevent you? Just because I know that there are more Blue Rodeo dates on the docket, is it something that's
Oh,
going to
no.
prevent?
I've been sort of what do you call it? Shipshape for a while. I've been able
Good.
to. The last few years, we've got it all worked out so well now.
I interviewed Brian Johnson from AC/DC, and we talked. It was not long. It was in 2020, and we were talking about death of former bandmates and friends in the business, and I was wondering what are your thoughts on your own mortality? Just I asked Brian Johnson, and do those things ever cross your mind? I know they cross mine. I'm 10 years younger than you, and I'm starting to think that we're
Right.
kind of on the back nine. What goes through your head with that kind of stuff?
Well, I've always been it's always been on my mind. You Mortality and the reason why we are here have been the prime motivators of my life. Like, um, that sounds funny to think that mortality is a motivator, but just the preciousness of existence and the peculiar nature of this existence and whatever consciousness is, and um, the history of consciousness. All of that has been a marvel to me and a fascination.
Your wife, Kaylee, has an Instagram page called Birder She Wrote that I am quite entertained by. And just for people who may not know, Kaylee and I used to work together. She was working at the K97 radio station in Edmonton years ago, and we spent time together at events and that sort of thing in the office and whatnot. Is there any possibility that you two might team up and do uh, kind of a YouTube sort of pilot to see if you can get on the Food Network or the Dog Network with some of the recipes that she does for the animals?
Well, Kaylee loves doing her Birder She Wrote, and she is quite charming and hilarious on those things. I, like I'm a reluctant participant in that sort of thing.
But highly entertained all the same.
By her, yes. By myself, not so much. I've had enough of me. Yeah.
Greg, I wish you many more hours of afternoons playing the guitar. And I do hope we met face to face back in early 90s somewhere, and
Right.
it's been too many years since we've had a face to face and a handshake. But I wish you many more years and enjoyment with your wife Kaylee, and continued joy in your music and songwriting and performance. And I hope many more Blue Rodeo and Greg Keelor fans get to see you perform in the future. Thank you so much for taking the time with me today.
Well, I look forward to that. I still love performing and I love touring. I love the disconnect of it. And Well, thanks for having me on today. And next time, you're in Edmonton, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, we'll say hi.
Sounds great. All right, man.
Okay.
Reluctantly.
This podcast, reluctantly sponsored by homegirls.ca, a top producing team at Remax Professionals. Also by Northern Alberta Heating, with work in and out of Edmonton and hiring bonuses for experienced candidates. Email your resume to tim@northernheating.ca.
Reluctantly.